So remember, the Renaissance valued the individual, right, more than, say, in the medieval era. Medieval era, you focus on our sin nature, our fallen nature. But humanists, they view humanity through a lens of, okay, what is it capable of? How can we achieve the greatness of the past? How can we do what the Romans did, what the Greeks did? So the humanists, right, believe in the value of the individual human, hence humanism. And they believe the way you draw that value out is through learning, through education, through study. Right? Problem is, some of that knowledge was lost during the medieval era, so they need to recover it. That's where guys like Petrarch come into play. He was a scholar, he was a humanist, and he traveled around Europe, particularly to monasteries, looking for the classics of the Greco-Roman world. He wanted to find Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and Aristophanes and Sophocles, those guys, so that he can recover that lost knowledge. And Renaissance means rebirth, a time of recovery. He wanted to recover that lost knowledge so they could study it again and improve themselves again. Now, the problem with Petrarch is he's a bit of an intellectual snob. You see, most of what he was finding was in Latin, which for him was great because he knew Latin. He thought all scholars should know Latin. So as he sought for manuscripts, most of them were in Latin. So Petrarch, when you stop and think about it, really he's a treasure hunter of sorts. But instead of gold and silver, he's trying to find lost knowledge. He's like a super duper nerdy Indiana Jones. But what he's finding is in Latin. For instance, what you see on the screen there, that's in Latin. The problem for most in Europe is, of course, they don't know Latin. What the people in Europe need, the majority of the people in Europe need, they need things in the vernacular. It just means the common language or common tongue of an area or a people. For instance, if you're German, of course, your vernacular is German. If you're from France, your vernacular is French. If you're from America, your vernacular is English. Do not say American. There is no language called American. Don't be that guy. Right? So they need things in the vernacular. And so you start to see the birth of vernacular literature during the Renaissance. Authors writing things in their common tongue, ditching the Latin of Petrarch and the humanist and going in a different route. So we're going to look at three different examples of vernacular literature, and they're very important, particularly the first two. The first two have a huge impact on modern society, even if you've never read them. First, we have Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, comedy does not mean funny ha-ha in this context. Comedy just means something with a happy ending. Right? So Dante's Divine Comedy, right? It was written in the vernacular Italian, right? This is one of Italy's masterpieces, right? And it was written in Italian vernacular, the common everyday language, right? And the basic plot is the main character Dante, right? His true love dies, passes away. And Dante wants to be reunited with his true love, which is in heaven. Right? So to get to heaven, though, he's got to travel through hell, then purgatory, and then he'll make it to heaven. So there's three parts of the story. There's the hell part, the purgatory part, and the heaven part. The most popular part is the hell part, the Inferno, as it's called. And even if you've never read Dante's Inferno, has a huge impact, right? Because his book was so popular, it influenced our idea of the afterlife. The scripture does not talk about hell a whole lot. It says it's real. It says it's not a nice place. It says there's weeping and gnashing of teeth and that kind of stuff. But our ideas of, demons torturing people and that kind of stuff, that's really more from Dante's Divine Comedy than anything else. You see, in his Divine Comedy, in the Inferno part, he said hell has 9 circles. Right? And the deeper into hell you go, the worse the sinners are. So like in the first circle, which you see up top here, are basically good pagans. They were good people, but they weren't Christians, so they can't go to heaven, so they're just in the first circle of hell, and their punishment is just to be really sad for all of eternity, right? Now, the deeper down you go, the worse the sinners get, right? So, for instance, when you get to hoarders, right? They are in the fourth circle here, right? They had all their wealth and they kept it to themselves, kind of like Scrooge, right? So they're forced to push boulders to the center of the circle of hell for all eternity. But in the same circle, there are spenders, people who are horrible with their money, and they're forced to push the boulders back out from the center. So these two, right, can never be done, right? And then you keep going, and the sins get worse and worse and worse. You get to the eighth circle, right? You've got flatterers, right? And they're immersed in human excrement for all of eternity, right? Or you get the schismatics, people who split the church, and for all eternity they're split from chin to groin, till you get to the ninth circle of hell. Or, of course, that's where the devil is, according to Dante. And that is reserved for traitors. And being a traitor was the worst sin. And so, in the center of hell, you have the devil, and for all of eternity, he's eating the worst traitors in history, according to Dante. Brutus and Cassius, who you learned about last year, and Judas Iscariot. So, this idea that in hell you'll have punishments that fit your sin, not exactly scriptural, more Dante's Inferno. So even if you've never read it, it's influenced you. Chaucer's another great example of a really important book that probably at this point you've never read, that influences you every single time you speak or write. Canterbury Tales was written in English. Right? Now the plot Canterbury Tales, for our purposes, is not super duper important. Basically, it's a collection of short stories. A group of pilgrims were on a trip, and to pass the time, they each told a different story. We're focused on the language, because when Chaucer wrote Canterbury Tales, there's a lot of like different versions of the English language floating around England. And when he wrote his book, it became so popular, his dialect of English, his version or his style of English becomes the most popular and comes to dominate it, right? So if you trace the family tree, if you will, of the language we speak, it traces back to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Now, it still looked very different than what we see today. So this is what Canterbury Tales looked like when it was written. So you can see our spelling has changed, for instance, right? A whole lot, actually. So that's what it looked like when he wrote it, and this is what it looks like today. So languages evolve like anything else. Languages change like anything else. One of the themes we're going to see this year is the struggle for women to have a better life in society. For most of human history, in most cultures, it's been a male-dominated society. And throughout this school year, we're going to see women push back against that. And this is a great early example. De Pizan's Book of the City of Ladies. Now, it was written in French, right? Vernacular. And the theme of her book was that if you just allowed women to have an education, they could learn anything a man could do. And the very fact that she's writing a book basically proved her point. And she used examples from history, women from history, to show men, look, this is what we can do. We are capable of this. Now, unfortunately, society was not radically changed by this book. Europe is going to stay male-dominated for quite a few more centuries. But De Pizan, she's chipping away at that idea that women can't learn, that women can't do things, that they have to have a man to tell them what to do. She's chipping away at that idea. Right? So you see this growth of vernacular literature, but there's still a problem. Most people still didn't have access to these books because they're really expensive, because books were written by hand. They were copied by hand, and time is money. The more time something takes, the more expensive it is. That's why a meal at a super nice restaurant is really expensive and a meal from McDonald's isn't. Right? Because McDonald's serves you real quick and you're gone, and they can serve someone else. Right? Time is money. So a handwritten book was really, really expensive. So books were really only opened up to the rich, to the wealthy. That's where my man Gutenberg comes into play. Right? Gutenberg invented in Europe the movable type printing press, which is essentially like a glorified stamp. Right? What you would do, you would take the letters, the metal letters, spell out whatever you need on the page. You would ink the letters, right? And then you place the paper right here, right? And then you close the lid, and then you would press down on it. It's like a glorified stamp, like I said, right? And there you go. And so if you need 10 copies of a book, right, you would make 10 copies of that page, then rearrange the letters to make the next page, and then do it again and again and again and again and again and again. And this saves time, therefore it saves money. Therefore, all of a sudden, books become far more affordable. All of a sudden, you see the birth of newspapers. You see the birth of magazines, right? And all of this is going to help to spread ideas faster, right? So to review, right, you've got the humanists, and they're saying, look, we can do great things. We just need to learn. We need to be educated, right? And then you see the spread of vernacular literature, which is going to open up knowledge to even more people. And then that door is opened up even more with the printing press, because all of a sudden books become more affordable. So you're going to see ideas spread a lot faster. For instance, Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, or Copernicus' ideas of the scientific revolution, which we'll look at in a different chapter. Right? The ideas are going to spread really fast now compared to previous times in human history.